we live in a weary world. I mean, we're all wore out, I think, a world that needs more joy. And I don't know about you, but I want to live in a different kind of neighborhood than this. And the soundtrack of our world is full of angry tunes. And this is the soundtrack I want to hear.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would ya be mine? Could ya be mine? It's a neighborly day for a beauty, would a neighborly day for a beauty. Could ya be mine? Could ya be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you. So let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please won't you be my neighbor?
Now, my friend Brandon did a pretty good job with Mr. Rogers, I think. I particularly like those socks, Mr. Rogers was great. And he'd say in there, hello, television neighbor. Hi, I'm glad we're together again. Hey, by the way, I'm glad we're together again, But if you remember that little wonderful neighborhood that he had, there were colorful little houses. The scenes would start out peaceful streets, and a little trolley would pass by the camera as it zoomed towards this yellow house. And then magically, you'd find yourself inside that house where there was a giant stoplight. I mean, what was that all about? But then inevitably, Mr. Rogers would come through the front door and open, and he'd saunter in, and his sweater, his sneakers, and did you know that those are actually in the Smithsonian Institute? His sweater and sneakers, and boy, was he happy, and he'd sing that happy song. And Mr. Rogers' neighborhood had a different mood than is common in our world right now. In his neighborhood, everybody was wanted, everybody was accepted, everybody was desired to be in his neighborhood, and being there was fine. It was just great, and it was a remarkable place, and there were no raised voices, no angry outbursts, no violent attacks, no pandemics, no fear of COVID-19, and in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, there's only the sense of peace, the sense of serenity, stability, joy, happiness. It just pervaded the whole place. And children were safe. Parents could just relax and be assured it was all good all the time in the neighborhood. And in fact, there was just one problem with Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. The only problem was it wasn't a real place. He would say that. He said he'd talk about how it was a neighborhood of make-believe, and children were repeatedly told that, and that's why it was so wonderful. Here's the secret to the peace and tranquility that existed in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Okay, if you remember the opening sequence, okay, the miniature model of a city and the neighborhood, and there was one thing that was missing in the whole place. You know what that one thing was? People. There were no people on the streets. There was no people there, and that's why there was no conflict. Because people can wreck a neighborhood. People, they're the worst sometimes. And people are filled with things like resentment, anger, outbursts of violence, unforgiveness. That can occur in a relationship, in a marriage. Husbands and wives can be that way. Kids can be that way with each other. Friends, leaders. How about politicians? How about political parties and all the stuff that happens on Facebook and all these other platforms? But Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, in Mr. Rogers, he would invite everybody to his neighborhood. But here's the problem. If any of us actually showed up and took him on his offer and crawled into our TVs and ended up being a part of the neighborhood, it would cease being a neighborhood of make-believe, and our presence would screw the whole place up, So I want to tell you a story. It's a story about a real neighborhood. It was kind of out in the country, and it's a story that I think describes no place in particular, but at the same time it describes every place in general. It's a story about a carpenter. Now, I don't know how long it had been since these two neighbors, okay, that lived near each other had even talked to each other, okay? And I think it maybe had been about 2 years or something like that. And it started over the dumbest thing. You know, it's not surprising to me, but it started over a cat. A stray cat. Of course it was a cat that caused the problem in the neighborhood. And I mean, one of them thought it was theirs, and then it went over to the other fellow's porch over there, across the little field in the valley there, and the other farmer took it in, and each of them thought it was their cat, and every time they tried to start talking about it, they'd start arguing about it, and so they just quit talking. All over a cat. Then this traveler came through the town, and he was looking for work. And one farmer said, well, yeah, I got some work you can do. You say you're a carpenter? I got some stuff for you to do. You see that house across that field over there? Well, that's my dang neighbor, okay? And you see the little ditch here in the middle? He calls that the creek. He dug it with his plow. And he went up on the hill and he changed the water, the way the water from the spring comes down. It's got a little trickle running through it, the creek. You know, well, if he's going to try to divide us up with that thing, I'd like to just as soon finish the job. I want a fence. I want a fence all the way across. I don't even want to have to look at him. Could you do that? And the carpenter says, well, yeah, I could start with the wood that you got over there. I could do that. But you'd have to go into town and get me some more. And so the farmer did that. And by the time the farmer comes back, driving in his truck up that old rutted road, you know, that his truck was all full of lumber. He looks out in that field, and where his new fence ought to be, he sees that the carpenter has built a bridge out of his wood onto his land, okay? And here comes his neighbor walking across the bridge, his hand stretched out, this big old stupid smile on his face, and coming over to him, he comes right up to his truck, and his neighbor says, you're a brave man. You're a brave man. I didn't think you'd ever want to even hear my voice again. I feel like such a dang fool. Can you forgive me? And this farmer finds himself saying, oh, heck, I knew it was your cat. And he looks over, and the carpenter's walking away. And he says, hey, I've got some more work for you to do. And the carpenter says, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. I'm needed elsewhere. That bitter old farmer didn't understand what he was going to get when that hired that traveler, that carpenter that came through. And the farmer got something that he didn't bargain for. And the same was true 2,000 years ago for some folks who were listening to a man who'd been trained to be a carpenter. And the carpenter showed up in a neighborhood that was used to fences that divided people. And he came to build a bridge. He came to build a bridge between God and people out of our wood on a cross. And he came to build a bridge between people out of our wood through our choices. To explain how the bridge would be constructed, he laid out a conceptual plan through a message known to history as the Sermon on the Mount. And it can be hard to grasp how radical some of his words were. He wanted people to build bridges between men and women. He wanted people to build bridges across cultures and across racial boundaries and cultures and classes of people. He wanted people to actually build bridges across political parties and hatreds and ideological hatreds. And he wanted to build bridges between the religiously committed and the religiously uncommitted. But Jesus, this carpenter, he showed up in a real neighborhood, just like ours, and he gave this message on bridge building, a neighborhood that was used to fences and fences that divided people. And he came to build that bridge between God and people using our wood on a cross. And he came to build a bridge between people through our choices. And like our world, Jesus' world was very politically divided. Did you know that? I mean, there was a lot of division. It was probably worse than what's going on in our world today, okay? The Romans had come. And they came into the land, they occupied the land, and they were the rulers of the land. And it was God's holy land. And there were a lot of people who were really upset about it, and especially the religious observant people really hated it. And you had all these different classes of people, all these divisions within their world. You had people like the Pharisees, who were the religious conservatives. And then you had people like the Zealots. These were the people that wanted to rise up and have riots and go out in the streets and assassinate people and stuff. And they were violent. And then you had people like the Sadducees. They were the sellouts, and they were religious sellouts, and they cozied up to the Romans. And so you had all these divisions and all these hatreds going on in their world. And knowing that was such a big issue, Jesus, there's this one little line in that message where he talked about bridge building and how people were going to build bridges to God, and he was building a bridge to them, and how they were going to build bridges to each other. There's a line he gave in there that spoke to these divisions that existed in their society. He knew it was a big issue. He knew what was going on, so Jesus went there. He talked about how to respond to political controversies and to a world that was weary of political divisions. And Jesus had something to say about it, okay? He responded. He taught us how to respond to our political enemies. He taught us how to handle faith-based, patriotic expressions, okay, of political agendas. He taught us what to do if our political enemy asks us to do something. And it's this one little line. It's in Matthew chapter 5, verse 41. He says this: "If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles." Okay? Doesn't sound like a big political statement, but it was. And this was no hypothetical, okay? Verse 41 in chapter 5 of Matthew is really important to our world today. In this verse, what Jesus was getting at, he was talking about how to deal with a political enemy. Roman soldiers would often tell somebody, they'd constrict them. They would make them carry their pack. And he'd make them carry a pack a certain distance. And he said if a Roman soldier ever did that to you, is what he was saying, you go twice as far as he asked you to do it, okay? And this happened all the time, and everybody knew that they were allowed to do this. And so and they hated it. And so Jesus was talking to this crowd of people who hated the Roman occupation of their homeland. And Jesus says, here's the prevailing attitude of the kingdom. A Roman soldier comes and gives you his pack and forces you to carry it for 1 mile for him. Okay? When you're done, look at him and tell him, I got some more time. I got some more energy. I'll help you a little bit more. I'll go an extra mile just for you. To say that without sarcasm, but with great sincerity. Now, think about this for a second. If the other Jews who hated the Romans saw what this guy did and said, they'd feel like he was cozying up, right? They'd feel like he was weak, or maybe some kind of traitor, some kind of Roman lover, or something like that. But Jesus says, care more about the person. This is what he was getting at. Care more about the person than what the person represents. Go the extra mile with people. Care more about them as people than the way they're acting maybe right now, okay? Do what you can to build a relational bridge into the future, and instead of allowing the present offense define the future by building a fence. It's a kind of fearless love, really. Think about it. Love that doesn't care what other people think. Love that doesn't care about a person's political or social agenda. Love that just says, you're a fellow human being, and I'm going to love you, I'm going to treat you right. Fearless love that transcends political issues. Fearless love that transcends social agendas. A love-based faith, a love-based religion, if you will, instead of a politically based faith. You see, political-based religion says this. This happens, okay? Your church, they ask for volunteers to make a presence, maybe in a park or something like that. Because the wicked are planning to demonstrate, okay, and carry signs that sets a spark. Political-based religion creates hateful outcomes, because what happens in the park is someone behind you, if you went, someone behind you might throw a stone and hit a thin man behind the ear, and there's blood now on his sign, and maybe his sign just read, there's nothing here to fear. Political-based believers, they could say that stone was the wrath of God, because God's going to punish all people like you. But here's the thing. We've seen this already. If you travel back 2,000 years, you'd find there's nothing new here, okay? Jesus' world was filled with that same animosity and the same divisions. Back then, you'd hear it all again. The same things were going on. Back then, political-based religion said, these soldiers are walking on sacred ground, okay? This land's our history. This land's our home. And they have no right to be around because they are the evil force of Rome. But a carpenter, a man named Jesus, who was much more than a mere man, taught something different. He taught just how strong this change of heart that he was angling for in people's life is supposed to be. It gets to the point where you show kindness to your enemy and you carry his pack an extra mile if that's what's required to show that kindness. And then that fearless love, because you're not worried about what other people are going to think about this kind action that you're doing for this fellow human being. That fearless love crosses those kinds of borders. Every political issue, every social-based issue, we can cross those borders and express what Jesus was saying, the very love of God. And, those who possess, a fearless love don't care about what, political, based religious maybe would think, okay? Instead, they hear the words of the carpenter. That's who they take their orders from, which brings clarity to what's really going on and what's most important. So they bring the teachings of Jesus maybe into that angry crowd where the demonstration's happening, and it snaps you awake and you see what's really going on. I thought I was here to fight some kind of righteous cause or something like that, but at my feet now is this man that's been wounded, and his head's cradled in his arms, and his blood is pouring out. And though the lines that were drawn in hate, that divided that crowd, that built that fence, there needs to be somebody who will drop that sign of Bible verse, okay, and help the wounded get up, clean them up, and help them stand up straight. That's what fearless love does. Fearless love makes you cross that boundary of hate, to cross over. You drop the Bible verse sign, okay, and instead you help the wounded stand up straight. Now there was back then, there will always be, the high religious, okay, who will scorn any action like that, and they'll try to even intimidate people that want to do this, and they'll say that you helped the other side. What's wrong with you? You hauled that soldier's pack. How could you carry that? Go over there to the other side. How could you do that? You know what he represents. But those who practice fearless love know that in their hearts they need to make a clear choice, okay? They're not joining the other side. They're just erasing the division, and they're expressing that love across that boundary, that border of hate. Jesus came into this world. That's what we celebrate at Christmas. He came into a weary world, a world that was weary of what was going on. And he came to bring hope. He came to bring joy. Would you pray with me? Lord, you came to build a bridge between us and you out of our wood. You did it on a cross. And you bridged that divide, Lord. And now you ask your people, those who have had that divide bridged, you ask us to build bridges to other people, between us and our neighbors. I pray you teach us how to live with this kind of fearless love that doesn't care about what people think, but instead love that builds bridges, that's willing to cross whatever walls or borders that divide, that instead builds bridges. Love that creates a beautiful day in our neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Love that asks, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Love that causes a weary world to rejoice. Amen. I hope you continue with us on our journey through the Sermon on the Mount. Hey, we meet on Sunday mornings on our Lake Wolford Road campus in Valley Center, California at 9:30 a.m. We'd love to see you in person. Bring the kids. We got stuff for them to do too. For those of you who have been supporting our ministry financially, we thank you so much for the gifts that you give us. And I hope if you haven't been supporting us that you'd consider doing so. You can see the information on the bottom of the screen on how you can do that. God bless you, and I hope you have a great week.
Fearless love, fearless love, fearless love makes you cross the border. At your church they ask for volunteers to make a presence in the park. That's where the wicked plan to demonstrate, signs to set a spark. Someone behind you heaved a stone that struck a thin man behind his ear. So now there's blood upon his side, which read, there's nothing here to fear. The wrath of God, somebody else will punish all of those like him. But if you travel back 2,000 years, I swear you'd hear this all again. Back then they'd say these soldiers walk on sacred ground. This land's our history and our home. They have no right to be around. They are the evil force of Rome. So how strong this change of heart must be, one that Jesus once described. Kindness to your enemy, carry his pack an extra mile. When fearless love, when fearless love, fearless love makes you cross the border. Mind snaps back to where you stand. Your church is here to fight a cause, and at your feet a fallen man whose head is cradled in his arms. And though his blood contains his death, and though the lines are drawn in hate, you drop your sign of Bible verse, the wounded stand up straight. When fearless love, fearless love, fearless love makes you cross the border. Oh yes, the high religious still will scorn, just like they did all that time back. They'll say you helped the other side. We saw you haul that soldier's pack. How could you carry that man's sign? When in our minds the choice is clear, I say, I didn't join the other side. The battle lines just disappeared. When fearless love, fearless love, fearless love makes you cross the border. Fearless love makes you cross the border.